Since this next chapter is very short, I will give an introduction to the book. Not a very good introduction, but I will do it anyway. As you can see, I have 3 copies of the book. I bought them fairly cheap, under $30 a piece. And this one was inscribed by Bethia Potter, Detroit, Michigan, October 24th, 1888. And since Emily's mother was a Potter, I assume this is one of her relatives. But I have not figured out who Bethia Potter is. Maybe it's not Bethia, but I'm reading it wrong. Bertha Potter, maybe? No, it can't be Bertha. Anyway, that's that book. And this one, which you can see privately printed, it's inscribed by Charles M. Carpenter from one of the Emilys who are mentioned frequently. 2 of the are they nieces? I think they are. No, I don't think they're related at all, but the 2 Emilys refer to the 2 children of Emily under Emily's ward. It wasn't much of an introduction, but just so you know. I use this copy because it's the more battered copy. Let's get to the story. A thoughtless little girl. The next day, the children and mamas and aunties were in Grandma's sitting room, ready for stories, and after the usual question, "What shall I tell you?" had been satisfactorily answered, Grandma began. "This happened," said Grandma, meditatively as she looked up over her gold-bowed spectacles. "The fall after I was 7 years old. That year was called the starving year for many years after, for the crops had failed entirely in many places, and in none was there a full crop, so that many people who had good farms and houses had hard work to get all they wanted to eat. Grandfather Ward had sent wagon loads of provisions to Uncle Zale's and Uncle Nathan's families in Scroon, and Grandfather Potter, see, there's the Potter name, had sent supplies to the Wyman aunts. Their crops had failed, and they hadn't raised enough to keep them from starving. I remember it well, and how sorry I felt for the poor people who had nothing to eat. We had enough, though we didn't eat any white bread that year. Cornbread and rye and Indian was all we got, but that was more than a great many had. An incident that occurred that year made a very strong impression on my mind, though I was so young. A good many of the little schoolgirls were going up on the mountains one Saturday to get blueberries. Mother had said I might go too. She filled a basket full of dinner for me, for we were going to stay all day. We had a merry walk up the old mountains and found the berries thick. We worked hard and picked fast, and by noon we were quite hungry. We found a nice pretty place on some rocks that overlooked the deep chasm and sat down under the trees to eat our lunch. The poor little girls who had none sat a little way apart and ate their berries, looking sorry and hungry, and a little ashamed too, because they were poor. I couldn't stand that, so I walked over quietly and divided my dinner among them. "Didn't you keep anything for yourself?" said Big Emily, opening her blue eyes wide. "No, not a bit. I had a good breakfast that morning, and they hadn't. I should have a good supper when I got home, and they wouldn't, so I gave it all to them. Mother had put up a good deal, thinking doubtless that there would be some who had none. But there was one little girl there who had a basket full of good things, white bread and cake and dainties, which none but those who were rich could have that year. She sat and talked with the other children who were eating about how rich her father was, and what good things they had to eat, and when she had eaten her fill, she stood up on the rock and threw what she had left down the mountain, and said, 'This is to feed birds.' The poor, hungry little girls looked wistfully at her, thinking how much they would have liked those pieces. I shall never forget how I felt, nor how wicked I thought that little girl was to throw away food that was needed so much. I told my mother when I went home, and she said that little girl was thoughtless, but that it was a wicked thoughtlessness to waste what would feed the starving. She was a naughty little girl, said Porty, shaking his curls. Tell us another story, Grandma. Another time, little Porty.